Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, production designer Michèle Laliberté, joins us to talk about their work on Scream 6. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode. So sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with Michèle. Hi, Michèle. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to meet you too. I'm glad we managed to organize a recording to talk about Scream 6. I always see, like, when you see the poster with the number written into it, I always think, do you pronounce it as Scream 6 or Scream 6? And then the way that they've done it, like how they've done with like 7 as well.
Yeah, I think Scream 6 is, well, at the beginning it was just going to be Scream with two exclamation marks, like as an almost Scream 2, like they did the Scream for the fifth one was just Scream. The poster came out later and we saw it was being a 6. So voila, it came out with a different title than the working title that we were working on. But I think for the fans, it makes sense that, they just call them 4, 5, 6. And so might as well.
Yeah, exactly. And carries on and doesn't confuse people because then it's like, have they remade Scream 2? Are they doing Scream 2 again? What's going on? But at least it's a continuation as a franchise. And yeah, it's like the longevity of it and how the fan base has grown with it over the years. But I guess as well, like because the film has been out some time, how have you found the reception of the movie?
I was really happy with the reception of the movie. I was surprised at the amount of love and interest and passion that was on the social media about the project. We knew the fan base was going to be behind it, but it got a really large audience. I think a new generation and previous older people who saw the first ones were there to see it again. So it reached a very wide audience.
I think as well because the whole film franchise, it's one of those. It's like a beauty of it because it's gone on for some time. You have that ability of having the old school fans of people who are like, I was there from day one, to then getting those newer fans in and people being like and drawing them in. I think that's the sort of beauty of those sort of franchises.
Yeah, I think the directors were really fans of the first generations of these films, like maybe the biggest fans of them. So even for them, like to be able to recreate or continue this franchise is like a gift. So that's how it felt doing it with them. I mean, they were really working for the fans as fans. So it's got a long history, but it was a challenge for everybody to make it up. The standards weren't gonna go down from the previous movies, but still interest people. And I think it worked from the box office, anyways.
Yeah, and people came back to it, didn't they? And it's been very successful. I think as well, if you're such big fans of the film, every day must be like a pinch yourself moment of like, wow, like we're doing another Scream together. We're doing it now, and then it's like it is expanded even more because we're setting it somewhere else and continuing our arc of the story while still bringing in the old characters.
Yeah, that was the big one of the interest of jumping on this project was to take the characters outside of Woodsboro and to really give it another scale and for a different environment, a little bit more scary and more urban, and maybe connect to more people who live in larger areas. And so some scenes in there that were scripted from the beginning, the subway scene and all of that was like candy scenes, and the directors were really wanting them to be done right and to say New York. There was hesitations whether it was going to be New York or just a general city, generic large scale city, but soon became something that they really wanted to have clear. So we transformed Montreal into a little bit more of a New York New York feel, and then they added all these wides and introduced the city at the beginning of the movie, which really definitely helps, to sell Montreal for that. But yeah, it was one of the nice things, to take it out of Woodsboro and play in town.
Going from like that small town of that sort of small population to then going to an area where it's just like you're so spread over, especially New York with all the subway systems and the different sort of boroughs as well, probably makes it easier to sort of play with of like where you can locate each sort of setting. And it's the same with like creating tension by being like, oh, we're 20 blocks away. You might be 20 blocks away, but then it's New York, so you have to add that tax of all that traffic and all the other people around in that city. I think it's quite when people talk about it, but being saying, because you're mentioning that it being shot in Montreal, that's probably quite difficult as a production designer to be trying to create a world of something very iconic like New York in somewhere completely different, not even in the same country. So how do you go about designing the city to make it look like New York? And then how closely do you work with the locations department to get the right locations or right areas that you can dress or work with to create the world?
Well, the locations department started really early on. The first couple of weeks we were together with the location manager, Michel Saint-Arnaud, and we scouted Montreal, before the directors came, just to look for other places, different places. Of course, we know the town well, so we have a lot of like go-to places. The challenge was really to think outside of the box and bring them to places we hadn't necessarily filmed before. So always more fun for us too, to find new elements and new territory. And there's like classic streets in Montreal that are closer to New York City. It's a different scale of town. It's not so high. The buildings are limited in height. But for the shots we were doing and the proximity that the characters have to the sets, the town was playing really well. There was no, moment where we needed to establish them in like high-rise situations, or, the subway was the tricky part, which was impossible to do in Montreal. The subway has nothing to do, and we have a subway. It doesn't look anything like New York. So this was the one thing we discussed in early meetings, how we were going to approach this one, how we could cheat it, what they wanted to do, how wide they wanted to see, and what kind of action was going to happen with all the extras and the costumes for Halloween night. It was important for the directors to have not just close-ups on like any train, but to be able to establish wider shots of. So that's where the construction of that set came about. So we ended up building both stations and the subway car on the soundstage. So that was that. The bodega was set in an area of Montreal where the streets are wider, which is a concern. Our streets are definitely, more a lot narrower than the ones that generally see in New York City. So we're looking for like wider streets, and we have a couple of options. So we ended up finding quite a great location that could work with the area where the students were living. So that was a one that took a while to find, but ended up looking really good. But it's a lot of work with the locations for sure. There's a lot of research to do, and phone calls and permits and traffic control, and a lot of signage to be changed because of our French city, which we enjoy every day, speaking French myself. But when you want to shoot for New York, you have to change all this signage and anything that doesn't read English. So it was quite a bit of graphics, which involve a lot of contracts with a lot of locations. So it's quite a challenge, but it was a script that was mostly location based. In general, when we read it, there's a few scenes we thought could have been done on stages. For example, Gail's fight sequence in her loft. It could have been a built stage set, but we found this location, and for many reasons, including wanting to see outside, like city lights, and being able to go out on that balcony and being in the city, which made us decide to try it on a location set. Ended up, working well, but it was another good challenge to film, day for night, and block off all these glass windows and all the reflections in the glass, and then you have no control on the glass, unlike when you're on a stage set where you can pull it out and put it back in VFX. And there's all these tricks you can use when you're on a stage that are kind of out of the question when you're on location. So yeah, different challenges, but the movie was more to a scale of principally being done on locations.
I think what's crazy to think is that the detail that people might not notice, like the changing of the street signs and the covering up of something that's in a completely different language, because as like as a viewer, you wouldn't notice these things, but then it's important because there's people who are so eagle-eyed that will notice these things at the same time. And there's also that detail of just making sure that's correct. There's also, when you're on location, how much work needs to be done to make sure that everything's dressed correctly and looks correct, and what the limitations will bring from it. It's quite interesting as well when you talk about the subway scene, and that subway set, which I'll have a question about that a little bit later on. But with something like that, is the knowing where you have to cut it. This is more for maybe a DOP and editors, but having that match cut of how it looks like somebody going into the subway and then that being on the stage compared to location work as well.
Yeah, it was there's always lighting issues that really tell whether you're really somewhere or then you're it's the lighting really plays a big role in making a stage set feel like a location work, really. I think Brett's work in the subway scene was immense. He had a lot to do on like all the traveling, because our car, when we're traveling, our car is just shaking, but like there's no movement, of course. So the lights were traveling to create that effect, and they did a really great job at that. It was a lot of R&D and like looking at other subway scenes and other movies to see how they were done and what worked well and what we needed to do. Our scene was a little different because it was packed with extras, so we barely could see outside the windows. It was like hints, of bits of lights going through. So we didn't necessarily need a tunnel set. It was really just the lighting was doing fine. But it took a few meetings, and discussions around the table to figure out which strategy was going to work best. And we ended up doing that in like a separate setting in a black box, just a curtain black box, and then the location, the station set were built beside it, and we just like rolled our subway in it when the subway was coming into the stations.
I find that as well incredible, the sort of idea of the lighting setup, because you forget that the car is moving, the train car, but then also the lights will move with it as well. It's like something that I completely wouldn't have thought of, and that probably has to go into your design process to make sure that whatever they rig doesn't hit your train car.
Yeah, well, they did break the glass, but it just made it look more like New York, So it just looked a little bit more damaged and a little bit more used, and so be it. What can you do? It's like the first shot when Mindy got her head banged into the glass cracked, and I was like, well, what can we do? We either take a time to change it or we just optimize the day and keep going. And in the end, it was left like that, and I think it's working fine.
Sounds like a producer's dream. They don't need to spend any extra money on the materials. So people have done you a great big favor.
It was not a bad. It was not a bad situation at all, but it happened a couple of times. We had glass breaking. Sometimes we had to fix it, but yeah, there was a bit of action in every set. I mean, every set was a fighting. Well, most of them there were fights in. So there was a bit of a, in location work like therapist office. When Ghostface comes in the therapist office, there was a glass change there. So it was supposed to be just a peephole that the therapist was looking through the hole to see Ghostface, and we proposed a different look so we could see a shape coming through and the grading behind, and so that modified the sequence quite a bit. But then the breaking of the glass and the falling on the ground, so we had to pad, those paddings and breakaway elements that are incorporated into the location. So there's always a bit of construction that's going on behind all of these location sets, even though we're not building all of it. We did build a few sets. The apartments were construction sets, stage sets, and the subway. I think that's it. Everything else was locations.
I think as well, when you're talking about that Ghostface interaction with the therapist office, how changes in the location can also affect the script. So instead of that peephole, it's that one big glass entry, and actually it's quite more foreboding, just seeing like the idea of this shadow come out to attack the therapist.
Yeah, we had a couple of discussions with the directors on how much, texture we wanted to put in that glass. Since we were building the glass as a breakaway glass, we had all the control in the world on the amount of frost or texture we had going on. So we did a couple of tests, how much we see him, the silhouette, and then the detail of his face when he walks in. But I really like that sequence when you see him walk into frame. I think the shot is really beautiful. It was a big plus. I think it visually, thinking as a visual, production design eyes, you always want to try to put, as much in the frame as you can. And definitely think this glass with this grating behind it was visually more impressive to see with the ghost face than just to stare at a hole where you see nothing but the person looking. You can't see what the person is seeing. So it was a little change, but I think it made a nice impact on that sequence.
This one's on me. We did jump a bit on the questions. I didn't get to ask about how the project came about and what made you want to take it on.
Yeah, that's a fun question. It's a project that I wasn't expecting to do or if I may say, willing to do. I wasn't a horror fan at all, and so when I got the script, I was really not spontaneously attracted to the project. I knew of Scream. I had seen the first one way back when I was 26 or something, but I didn't really want to do it. I was like, I'll read it, and I started to read, and I stopped after a few pages because of this first sequence, which is so intense. And called back the producer. I was like, I just can't do this. I'm not gonna enjoy this at all, and I don't want to go through with this project. And then he proposed that I start by watching the other movies again, and then I meet the directors, and so I did. I watched them all, like a full week of watching them again and again, and then got caught up with the fun meta self-referencing aspect of it. Which is very playful and like it became more like a game, and then I ended up reading the rest of the script obviously before I met the directors, and when I hopped onto the museum at the end, I was like, oh, that's interesting. After seeing all the movies, thinking you're gonna recreate an homage to the whole franchise, like wrap it up and really dig into all this self-referencing, but like the hyper meta set. So I was that to me was like interesting, as like attractive, and the fact that it wasn't in Woodsboro after watching the 5 first ones, that it was there was one in Hollywood, which was interesting to take the characters out. So I thought having the characters out of Woodsboro was a fun twist on it. And then I had this Zoom call with the directors, and that was it. I was convinced. The guys are, like I was saying, they're like they're great fans of the franchise. They just love these movies with deep passion and respect the fans, and so their take on it was like never sarcastic or condescending, or they always talk about this movie franchise with so much love and care and sincere interest that it's like it's contagious. So yeah, after the call, I was convinced I wanted to do it with them. It was no doubt. And then I had to convince my crew, because there were a lot of people reacting like I was, Although there was a few people that were really deep fans that came on board, graphic artists, for example, who was like really into this. So that was really fun from the beginning. I was like learning and becoming a fan as I was digging into all of these details, but it was fun to have people react spontaneously to proposals, like have a fan reaction and like, oh my God, this is gonna be good, this is gonna work. We gotta do this. There was like reactions from the inside of the department too. So that helped me grow, grow my interest on the project, and the fun just kept going on, like just kept growing as we were doing it. It became a really like a family. It was like becoming a part of that family.
I think it's also a testament to the producer to sort of not give up on you in terms of like go back, go with a fresh mind, and go from there and see what see if you change your mind, and then we'll build up from there. And does this Yoda mind trick to get you back enticed again. But you do mention that first scene where it's very tense, but it's also very brutal. I guess you could say it's like the cold opening, and it's just I can imagine reading on screen can be quite difficult as well because it's just like, oof, this is happening, this is happening. It's like, where are we going to go with this?
Yeah, after a couple, I was like 10 pages in. I was like, oof, I think I'm just gonna sleep on this, this not possible. No, it's an intense script to read for sure. But after a couple pages, you dig back into the characters, and once you're off of that Greg and Jason's apartment, because up until that end of that sequence is like killing after killing. Yet you don't understand anything, you don't know who these people are, what they're doing. There's like no introduction. It's kind of a coldly like covered in blood after a couple of pages. So it was it was the first time I was reading a script that was so harsh to start with. But it was a fun scene to film. I mean, it was like shot on location. She was screaming for real. The people in the area, it's like some people weren't happy. It was like in the middle of the night, and they were coming. I was like, come on, guys, you guys are a little noisy for filming at night. Usually you try to be quiet, but she was screaming her lungs out. Couldn't hold it. It's just like you have to do what you have to do, right? So it was a fun night.
Filming on location, yeah, you will have those people come up and be like, what is going on? But also, if like they didn't warn people, that'd be like screeching. I wonder how many calls the police must have got or ambulances at that time to be like, oh my gosh,
Well, most
something's
people
crazy is
around were
happening.
warned, but there's always one person that missed the warning, and it has to work at 5 in the morning, and it's like, yeah, it wasn't easy on the location residents, but thanks to them, it's a nice area of town. This was shot in Old Montreal, in a little alley in Old Montreal. It's a street that's really looking like one of the streets we have that do look a bit like New York. So the most like New York. So it was kind of a gotta do it there, and not many other options and around that had this connection with, a nice place to do the restaurant, which wasn't a restaurant, but we cheated inside and outside in different locations. And then that little alley next to this big passing street. So it was kind of one of a few options we had, and had to make this one work. So that was a hard location work. I can tell you the location departments worked a lot on this entry scene. It was a challenge for them for sure.
Yeah, I think again, just like the whole overall, the insight of it as well, that the fact that it's in New York and then it's not actually shot in New York, and the way that people are able to cheat these things to create the looks and whatnot, it's always still, I think that's probably the most amazing thing that how much work people go in to get these things to look right. And it just
Yeah.
looks, and it is just the sort of, I don't know, it's very hard to sort of describe, but the sort of admiration you would have for people to go in and just be able to pull the audience into this world.
Yeah, there's many departments involved to make the magic happen, but especially in city sequences like that, picture vehicles are key. Cabs and buses and ambulances and anything that has graphics, police cars, yellow cabs are like the iconic image that sell New York.
Also, I want to sort of jump in because you mentioned it earlier about the shrine, which is kind of like a centerpiece of the film with lots of details hidden in it and also on display, literally and figuratively. So there's going to be like a number of questions regarding it, so apologies if it comes off as quite loaded. But where do you begin with the design of the area? Is this something that's written in the pages, that it's got certain items from certain films and it's set in this whole area? Or did it read as like a blank canvas and you had a lot of creative freedom of what you wanted to create?
Yeah, it's somewhere in between the two. I mean, we had a lot of creativity room in there. The script was the first script we got was really vaguely mentioning, well, some elements, a schedule from a student, a Mickey's class, and then there's the knife that killed or stabbed Kirby, and there were just a few things that were mentioned that were related to this story, but the space itself was scripted as a generic warehouse. There wasn't much, description about what it was, and it was like a blank canvas. And even like the directors didn't really know why this location, why they had a warehouse, who was creating that shrine. Even all of these questions were still in the air. Like, we wanted to have a shrine. We wanted to celebrate the franchise. That was clear. But like, who was the brain behind it and who created it sort of came up as we were starting and digging into the script. Before the directors came, we did scout for warehouses, and larger ones and smaller ones, and with different textures, and some places were interesting to do this shrine as well. But the idea, I mean, since the script was loaded with references to Scream 2, and at the time was even like gonna be titled Scream, 2, like the fifth one was Scream. There was a definite relationship, like the quad, phone call and Ghostface on the phone, and there was a lot of references from 2, and so came the idea to introduce the theater, which was in 2, whether at the beginning with the movie theater sequence or at the end with Sydney playing in a theater play, and the final killing happening in that theater. So the theme was like suggested by Scream 2, and so we started to look with the locations team for options of interesting abandoned theater that we didn't know of in Montreal. No, living here, we had no like, oh, that's going to be here. It wasn't like an evident choice at all, and having that, so we found a theater that wasn't closed, it was functioning, it's not abandoned, but but their schedule was open to some flexibility, and having a window that we could slide our prep and shoot and wrap in. And so we proposed this place to the directors, and they came and visited it, and the writers came and visited the theater, and we ended up rewriting the scene for it to be set in this space. So the area was like one of the biggest questions, like why, but then it made it it gave this direction to the whole scene, where it became clear that Richie was the collector. And in Scream 5, there's like a ton of places where he just acts like he doesn't know anything about the franchise. So having now in 6, like the realization that he knew more than anyone, any of those killings, and knew exactly what was happening. And it makes the 5th one look even more scarier. It's like give 5 another layer in hindsight. But so when Richie became the collector, the fact that he was a young filmmaker studying movies with Greg and Jason, and collecting these elements that were triggering real killings, all these evidence of real killings that were triggering scenes for movies. That was his interest. So he was creating his own movies. So came the idea of this projection screen where we could project his movies on, or bits of his movies or of his world. So we shot these films, and so it kind of grew on itself as we saw the potential of that space. I think it really changed the whole end of the movie. It gave it color, flavor, like the fact that the screen was in between the audience and the stage also gave us some different rooms for fights and different colors and layers of lighting possibilities too, with the projection of the movies and the big opening of the projection, room with this nice light and the concession stand at the beginning, at the entrance, which offered another type of space. So all of these areas of the location gave the writers some material to rewrite the scene. So a bunch of scenes were rewritten to suit that. And as we were doing that, we knew we had to do the shrine itself, like the collection. And that was like, first of all, it became just like a big list. I mean, we were watching all the movies and making a long list of like all the killers, all the killings, all the murders, and who was killed and how they were killed, and what were the objects that could have been kept by police department as evidence of crimes, what on crime scenes, what they could have kept for analyze, which would be what Richie would have gotten from his father. So that was kind of the logic behind. So we made a nice long list of over 100 elements and presented that to the directors with photos and screen grabs of all of those things, and not knowing we could reproduce them all, but at least just to trigger the conversation. And every item was like, gotta do that. Oh yes, oh yeah, that would be amazing. Oh my God, like fans would react to all of these. Well, they were reacting just like that, and they wanted it all. So we went all in. So it was like a joint venture, all departments on board, and it's like costumes. Every Pew's in costume design. I mean, created Stu's robe, Billy's shirt, Nancy Loomis's outfit. All of these were recreated, matched the bloodstains and the rips up. So I mean, you can go through the list, but there's all of these costumes, and then there's a props that did like the fax machine from Scream 3, that got caught on fire, and so we burned out a fax machine. And everything became like a joyful reproduction of people trying to make it as good as can be for the fans to see. So yeah, props were involved, Dewey's badges and all the knives and then all these amazing drawings that were done by Jeff Isherwood, like if Richie had taken the time to analyze every killing and every murder and redraw it and spotting where the wounds were and understanding the killings, and like as a paying respect to the Ghostface killers. So these allowed us to have some images within the displays, to put faces that fans could recognize and help understand whose knife that was, and add to the precision of the presentation. There's a lot of graphics involved in there too. Graphic artists were all over the place with the posters, all the stab posters, the posters from the theater play, the Cheetos bag that was reproduced, with the camera for the photographer that gets killed in the van. There's a Stabathon tickets, all you want. Construction got involved, and they had a direct star to build, and we built that mask from Scream 3. I mean, the list goes on, and in the end, we have almost everything that was on that list, but a few pictures that we couldn't get the rights on, or it was very like specific things that we couldn't reproduce, that had to be the thing, and we couldn't get the thing. In the end, it was quite a success. And when the directors walked in the set the first time, they were like kids in a candy store. It was the best reward you can get for hard work, The reaction was just golden. So we knew we hit the mark when we saw their face. It was quite the gift, but the fans reacted the same. But it was really as we went along, and they were positioned so that they could interact with the action, and there was a lot of rehearsals. So it was a work in progress. It wasn't all written at all. It really was something that grew as it became more real. There's a lot of illustrations done also. We did illustrations to show where we were going to put things, how the lighting would work, because it's a dark place, but they need to see what's inside the casing. So we made nice illustrations to show the directors, the thinking of how we could light that. And I mean, I have all of these images on my website. If people want to have a peek, I can give you the address. You can have a look at the images to see, what's of these illustrations. But it was a super tool to work with, just even for us, so we can move things. Because when we got in the location, it was a very quick installation, and we already had to, make the whole place look damaged because it was like a nice theater. It wasn't damaged at all. So all the aging has to be done, and so I'm moving all the seats around and changing the curtains for damaged curtains and putting our own. And we even built a back wall. The back wall of the theater is a stage, a fake back wall. So there's quite a bit of construction that came in, and we had very little time left to dress all the elements in, so we had to know exactly where they were going. So all of this planning was really helpful.
So to sort of listening to that answer, because there's so much to sort of take away from it in terms of having, it sounds like you had a lot of creative freedom because it was not having that much written on page, but then also the sort of like having your team going through that painstaking process of, all right, so this is what we want to have from each Scream film. This is what we want to get, and then recreating that. So I can imagine there'll be certain ways that somebody would have done, let's just say, the TV that fell on Stu's head. Now, actually, the crack is in the wrong place. The crack needs to be the opposite side of the screen. And then it's those moments as well where you have to put that sort of extra detail into it to make it, to recreate. Then also the idea of like, there must have been so much that you needed to choose from and wanting to put in. But then also there must have been one or two things where you think, maybe not necessary, or maybe this would be too big to recreate. For example, this is just an example, so please, whoever's listening, don't bite my head off. If you have the garage door from Screen 1, for example, it's like you wouldn't be able to put a whole garage door into that area.
Yeah, we ended up putting the one slice of garage door where the cat trap was, where she got trapped. But yeah, the whole door in the space would have just looked wrong, so, and be too heavy and too present so it was like suspended. And, there were a lot of elements that were background. This green mask from Screen 3, it's so huge that almost didn't make it to the final cut. And I was like, oh, it's gonna be overkill to see that. It's such a strong color and such a big presence. But I thought it was just a hilarious element and like so bad. I mean, so large and green and the color and everything, and like impossible to miss, from Screen 3. So we just had to find a spot. So it was like, put a little bit further in the distance, but it just adds to the layering of things. And like, why would the cops take the whole garage door? It's like this logic too. Why would you just grab the thing that has the blood stain on it to capture and everything else? Why would you bother to take it all? So it was more discussions and like try to apply some form of logic to our decision, and it became its own sort of game of finding the right thing, placing it the right way, and not overloading the place, having some room to move around, have all this action happen, have some things that have to be breaking away because they're falling on them. So there's like, what can we break? What kind of casing, what's inside, what's not dangerous to fall on, it's not gonna hurt, or we can make it soft, or so there's all of these conversations with stunts. So many considerations in the end that end up the decisions sort of make themselves by this logic that applies to the set.
Yeah, then you're right. Why would someone have that whole garage door? And imagine even buying it, and then how does somebody transport it? And then how odd would that look as well, thinking about having this whole thing? Or even to the case of like, spoilers, I know it's like a family orientated killers. Imagine finding out your son spent like $10,000 on a garage door.
Exactly. Well, it's all a little weird and over the top, to think that Richie collected all of that he would have rented this whole huge theater, or squatted. So we're more into that kind of, this place was abandoned. You kind of see it when they come out of the subway station to go to the theater in the last time they go, and they're walking on the sidewalk. There's this theater beside them, and it's all graffitied over, and we're saying this is that theater that they're going into. They're just walking by the front entrance, just to establish how damaged and abandoned the place is. Because once they walk inside, yeah, there's spider webs and it's back entrance and full of graffiti, and we tag the inside. But I think he's just squatting the space and not paying for it. He's not like renting this space. But of course, then there's all this lighting, and the costumes are all lit and the projector is working. And so, I mean, when you try to find a logic, you fall short a bit, but you sort of have to dive into the logic of the Scream movie and accept conventions for the love of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that sort of epitomizes how fans, when there's people who are super fans, or in Richie's case, sort of not even obsessed about it. I think obsessed is like times 10, what it can do to like people's psyche and what it can make them do. And as you said as well, it adds another layer to Scream 5, where you think it's just someone who kind of took it on to the next level, and then it's just, yeah, it makes it even darker with that they were always a fan. They always knew that they were into this sort of stuff. They were always pretending that they weren't, and then actually they're completely upset.
Yeah, that gets into the toxic fan, toxic fandom. It's like just too far, taking the thing too far, and liking this to an extent that you want to create killings to make your own movies about them. And it's like losing reality in it. So that's the scary. That's why when you say all the victims walk in there and they see all of these things, whether it's their uncle's shirt or the knife that stabbed me, or so it's really related to each of them individually. I mean, that was a layer that was fun to do, and fun for the actors too. When they walked in, it was like, it took a moment before they started filming. They were just like, looking at everything like a real museum, and people were like, oh, people would pay to see this, you should open the doors and let people come in. But like to the level that you would actually collect that for yourself and like own everything that was all the evidence of all these crimes as something you do in your life as you're studying and having a job and a girlfriend, and but having all of that in your mind is telling a lot about the character that Richie was. Or it's like it built Richie's character in 6, even though he wasn't in the movie. Well, he was on the screen. We see him. It's like the actor sent us movies that he filmed of himself when he was young, and that's what that was projected on the screen. Like it's the same. So it was pretty sweet for him to collaborate with us and give us some visual that would help us sell the idea that all of these projections were his creation.
He does create that ominous presence really by being there, and you just know that like what is going on. And then when you see the twist happen, you're just like, okay, it just sort of all makes sense in that sort of way. So just going back, because I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the subway and the whole scene of that. But what I'm curious about is the use of space for something like a subway car, because it was built on on stage rather than in an actual subway car on location. So you had that sort of freedom of making it bigger or smaller and using that space. And what conversations do you have with other departments to make sure that you can create something that's going to be fit for use, and that you can kind of make sure that it's rigged correctly, and but you can also create like that sort of iconic subway feel?
We had a DP who was from New York. Brett was living in New York. So the subway car was very sensitive to him, and it had to be put on. There was very little modifications from reality that we did to the train. It's the same size. It's the same length. There's just there's a driver's places that are in each car that create a little nook inside that we took out to give us more room at the end of the car. That's basically the only modification we made. They really wanted to have it have it just like it's supposed to be. The directors in general, I mean, are filming more. They're not the directors who will pull out walls to film as if the place is small, and it's just not the way they do things. They work like they work on location, even if they're on the soundstage. It's gonna be the set on the soundstage was a little bigger than it, normally would have been for an apartment, but that was like really to have the camera inside the place and not be able to not need to remove walls or wild things as we were filming. So same for the subway car. It wasn't, I mean, doors, and we were controlling the opening and the closure of the door with special effects. And the train car could move in, roll in our station. That was collaboration with special effects too. They were pulling and pushing it to put in position. We used this little magic trick of adding a mirror at the end of the car to make it like there was a second car in the station, although we just built one, and also allowed it to extend the amount of extras, which were all in costume, so you just see more and more people in the background. But that was all tests that we did. Now the lighting too was incorporated into the set design. I mean, a train station, subway station, you really see the lighting. It's like practical lighting. So the whole set was lit by the practicals that were put in. So we collaborated with electrics to make sure that we had the right lamps and modify our fixture to allow for their tubes, which we often do. Nowadays, the tubes don't necessarily fit in standard fixtures, so we're like adapting them. So that was most collaboration. And then there's a conversation with color wise of like choices of advertisement and costumes, and trying to discuss how we balance the amount of color we put in our ads and versus the amount of people in the car, which is already making it super busy. So we had a little bit of a balancing of this visual information there. It was one station that became two stations, so we had a changeover to do. So there was a logistics on this front too. It was a great set to build. I mean, it was full of texture, full of patina, and the tiles and all these great details that you can find about New York subway stations that are so beautiful. So it was a very nice research-wise, and for the painters and sculptors and everybody involved in it to make it real.
I think as well, when you're talking about the design, having that mirror to make it look like there's a lot more people, but then also there's the idea of your ads not being too bright, as there's quite a lot of people already there in the car, and because it's Halloween, there's going to be such a mixture of colors with what people are wearing, and there's different outfits that people can come up with on such a day. But I guess that also comes down with the costume department of what they're going to put in. So if they say we're going to have someone all in red, then you kind of like, well, I have to tone down what we have at the back, change the graphics there, which is also quite like interesting, and what a different sort of challenge that is going to create as well.
Yeah, it was a great collaboration with Avery on every front. I mean, she was she came in and really, like, whether from the therapist or we were discussing when we look at every location, what were the color palette, and trying to keep it steady through the movie. And as a general note, we were trying to avoid reds, to leave all the place for the blood to splash and take the red impact. Red is such a strong color on screen that it was our wish to keep it to a minimum or nothing at all until we get to the theater, which is a red space, like the killer's box. So there was very little of that throughout the movie. Anything we could control, that we took the red away. And it worked well. I think it really did. Like, you end up in a bathroom scene with all this blood splash. It really just makes for this color to even have a bigger impact.
Just what's happening on screen and adding to that sort of tension as well, making sure that it's not an assault on the eyes for the viewer, but also just making sure that it looks perfect for what they have. Just to go to my penultimate question, what was your favorite set design?
It's always a hard one, but I mean, in this movie, I think that the theater is definitely the one that comes to mind first, for all the reasons that we've discussed. And I've studied theater before. I just love I just love the load that comes with the space, the fact that it was abandoned, the research we had to do on these abandoned theaters, just beautiful imagery, and all the the graffiti work and all of this that got started at the theater and it was spread throughout the movie. It was so many details and such a nice collaboration with departments that it was the most, for me, the most fun thing to do. The apartments had were a nice challenge too for other reasons and action and find the space that really worked for the scenes we wanted to do and the inside and outside and the connection with the locations that we had. And so they were like a location for the shaft where we saw Danny in the ladder scene, and then another location for the lobby sequence, and then the apartment kind of blending these two locations. So this was a nice challenge technically, the apartment and to give the right mood and spread hints of who the killers could be here and there. And it was every set was different but the theater was definitely like the candy, a little icing on the cake.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be the standout. I think that would be one to choose from. I think for me as well, the bodega is quite cool, and I think that's more to do with like it's something, obviously in the UK we have something different than a bodega, but we have something like a similar sort of setup. So it's like the idea of seeing something in your everyday life on a film and how you kind of just be like, everything, it doesn't look any different to what I would see in real life. So it's like the like for like, it looks really cool. But then also the whole action sequence there in the way that there's deliberately been set up with these sort of bottles are here, this section is here. That also the mirrors for at the top, I'm not sure what they're called, but the sort of mirrors that the owner can look in to see what customers are doing. It's things like that as well that kind of you don't think about as like a big set piece, but it's also just like actually stuff like this is really hard to do and it's really cool to see as well.
It was actually it wasn't a bodega per se when we rented it. It was like a beer store and there was nothing in the middle except beer cases and beer displays. So we emptied it all. Basically, it was all everything went to the basement and it was filled with our set dressing. It's a big action scene with a lot of blood and killing, so it was hard for product use too. It was like not everyone wants their bottles splashed with blood. It's not it's not something that's easy to sell to companies. Yeah, give us the right to use your bottles and we'll just cover them up in blood. So many people turned us down and we had to come up with our own beers, and which created for a lot of fun names. That so if you dig in and look at the detail on the cans, there's a lot of fun little names there. But we had some sponsors or people that allowed us to use the real products. That's always nice because it gives the reality. It's you react to real products like it's a real place. So it was really, really nice to have a couple of partners there that went along with our crazy scene and allowed us to use their products. But yeah, the mirrors, that was all added in, and there was a choreography that was really clear to the directors of how they wanted to play. So everything was positioned, the aisles and but to be so that the scene would work. But to be in a real place, I mean the texture that you get and the use on the floor, the patina that's there, the lighting when we changed all the light sources, but the fixtures were there, and so it's like a harsh. They really played like a harsh, cold light. It was a location that worked really well. It was a hard scene to do on a location, and it was the last thing we shot. It was the last day of filming. We're on the bodega set, so it's everybody was happy and sad that it was happy for the set to be finished and sad that the movie was done. It's a set that has a little sweet sour memory to it.
I think as well, because films aren't shot in order, it's funny how this is the last scene that's like sort of last scene shot, and it's the sort of last scene that you're dressing. So it's probably I can imagine it being quite hard as well, because you have all these, a mixture of both probably fake company names and also real company names. And then there's always uncertainty with company names because you have to get the rights to use them. Then if somebody explains like why are you using it, it's like it's for a horror film, probably covered in blood. People probably get quite hesitant, and so there's not a bad image of it. So I can imagine you have those backup posters for the Coors Light beer that, last minute they'll say yes, so then you just have to switch that around, and making sure you don't have anything that they said no to being visible.
Absolutely. It was really, and there's even visual of the companies that we did have, access to, but like some specific posters that they had, we couldn't use. Like you can use this one, but not this one. You can do this, but not that. So it was quite tricky, and we almost, we were like, we can't do a Motyka with this scene. We have to find another store, something else. We don't have enough product. It's gonna be too complicated. Anyways, we had a lot of resistance on subdressing, and because we just didn't know how, with the means and time we had and crew, how we could make it work. And we thought we were gonna get more product placement than we actually did because of the reasons we just discussed. So it was quite the challenge. But there was a lot of products that we did a setup in the shop, with all the aisles, and put all the products we could find that had no specific graphics, or created some of our own labels, and the graphic artists were all over the place. It was just after we shut the theater with all these details and posters and books and articles and all of that. So the bodega was like a huge graphic fiesta. In and out. The street dressing, all the names on the stores around. There was trucks and vehicles to dress, and ads on buses and ads on cabs. And so it was New York being New York, and Montreal being Montreal, a lot of things to hide, and street signs. And so it was that last final location was like a firework finale.
Getting everything in there, and then also the graphics team being able to sort that out, all those posters, and put in all that effort as well. It's like, this is your time to shine. Let's see what you can create, and let's make it look as cool as possible. Just to go to the last question, the film, it has a lot of Easter eggs in it. Some of them are very visible, some of them are not. Some of them are in the theatre scene. What was your favorite Easter egg to put into the film?
There's quite a few of them, and they're like spread throughout. Favorite one? Well, I have a special care. I like the painting in Quinn's bedroom quite a bit. I don't know if you've seen it, but one that I like a lot. And it's a painting that was in one of Hitchcock's movies that we found a replica of, and installed it. It was in the killer's living room, so we decided we'd just drop it into Quinn's bedroom for the sake of like hinting that maybe she's in the family. But so that was to me that was a little spicy one. Like, are we daring to do that? Okay, let's do it. But there's also the originally the bathroom, the bathroom murder, the guy who's dead in the bathtub. We were supposed to do the scene, we were supposed to film the scene where he was getting killed, and it was really close to the classic Psycho shower scene. So our bathroom in the girls' apartment is like based on the Psycho bathroom, lighting, tiles. That's kind of a nice little wink that we had in there. There's a lot of things. I love the Russian dolls that we did of the ghost faces on the chimney mantle of the Greg and Jason apartment. And there's so many. It's such a movie with so many Easter eggs. I'm like, my brain is spinning on which one I like the most. But I think these ones are among my favorite ones, the ones that come to mind first.
I think as well, they're not obvious choices where you'd say, oh, we had this, we had that. I think as well, having that Easter egg of the painting in Quinn's room is, as you said, it's like a nice little hint. And also having that, it's like makes me want to go back and watch it, just to be like, oh, okay, like now we know, like now, even though I've seen the film, But then when you start picking up these little breadcrumbs and piecing it together, I think that's what makes the film so great as well, is that even though you know the killer, it's like, now I'm going to look out for other details to see where these sort of ideas and clues have been peppered in.
Yeah, it was a real team effort, and people were coming up like some decorators and props, and they were coming up in graphics, with ideas and like, oh, what if we did that? And every time we brought ideas to the directors, they were just like falling for everything. Yes, let's do it. They came up with the Abe Snake Bodega name, which was kind of a nice one that I had no idea what that was and had to look up. Like, what is this? Why? What are they? And when you look it up, you're like, oh, that's such an interesting idea to put on a banner. So there was so many. We had a Ready or Not moving truck that came in outside the bodega to hide. There was a bunch of graphics related to that movie, and the actress was in it, and there was one person wearing that costume in the subway. The subway scene is loaded with all these horror movie costumes. We also had a Halloween store in the back of the opening scene where you see all the costumes in the window of the horrors, just to set up the Halloween feel at the beginning. That was a nice little set up to create. We had a Mexican restaurant at the opening too, and we made nice playing with the Le Jour de la Mort, the Dia del Morte theme. So all the heads, the skeleton heads that have these big eyes that are not unlike the ghost face mask, and they were all over the restaurant. So we're trying to find, a bunch of different elements to bring in horror ideas and sprinkle them throughout. So just so the fans would have, layers and layers of things to see, and they do. I mean, it's amazing how much they were scrutinizing all the images that came out when the trailer came out of the shrine. It was so surprising to see the care that they were putting in trying to see everything that was in that image.
Yeah, I think when I was researching, there was a number of sort of videos where people had stills going bit by bit on the trailer of the shrine, being like, what we can find. And it's even the sort of what you said about that Abe Snake Bodega, that's a reference to Wes Craven's films from like the 70s.
Yeah, he was using that name when he was directing. From what I read, I mean, I'm not the Wes Craven reference here, but from what I read, he was directing pornographic movies and using that name as a cover up. So I thought it was kind of funny to have that on our banner. It's like really for the initiated people, it's like the really niche information.
Yeah, and I think that is the perfect note to end the episode on, with that niche quote, not quote, sorry, with that niche fact. Michèle, thank you so much for your time today. Scream 6, I think you can still catch it in cinemas, but it's also now on VOD to rent and buy. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely.
Thank you. You take care. Bye-bye now. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.